Okay, let's do part 2 of how to create a world building story bible in Notion. So in the first part, we sort of set it all up and it was very beginner friendly and very follow me as I go through every little thing about Notion for this to work. So this time around, I want to focus on, one, giving you some more examples and creating some more pages specifically for Project Snowstorm. I'm also going to talk briefly about the one I really did this thoroughly for, which is my sci-fi Space Princess project. And then I'm also going to jump into potentially timelines and character sheets. Last time we'd set up this story bible section and I'm gonna go into it and click on Project Snowstorm. So in my world building section, I had essentially started with the Rift, history and politics, noble families, etc. This was all done as part of a fake new account. I mean, it still exists, it's not fake, but I'm just gonna go back to my actual main one where I have since then potentially updated some things. So if I go back to my actual My Books section, I can go back into Project Snowstorm here. And you can see here there are a couple of other pages. I have a page for an outline, which is empty, but it exists. I also have a page for characters, which is sort of empty. There's basically a setup for my initial characters, but I've not done anything to those pages. So if I go back to the world building section, you can see it's a little bit more full and there's a little bit more elements to it than in the one we'd started setting up together. So once I have set up my world building sections, I start thinking about what I want to put in there. There's a lot of videos out there about the steps you want to take to create your world, and funnily enough, most people start with a map of the world, which I find very interesting. I am not a huge epic fantasy or high fantasy reader, and I've never been a huge fan of maps because I completely forget about them. I never actually check them. I never actually go back to look at them while I'm reading. And I know that makes me a terrible fantasy writer if I ever become this. Because a lot of people are obsessed with maps. So I get it. It's just not my priority, but feel free to go into that part. And there's lots of videos out there on how to create world maps. So the first thing I like to do is select some books that are going to be of interest to inform me on the world building part of my novel. For instance, for this book, because Project Snowstorm is more high fantasy, I'm first of all reading on writing and world building. I'm using the second one because it has a lot to do with monarchies, class, wealth, power, class systems, and all of those elements are quite important in Project Snowstorm. So what I'm currently doing is just going through each chapter. I sort of tend to highlight bits that I find interesting, that might be useful for me. I jot down some thoughts based off what I've just read. And these are, for instance, on page 231, there was the start of how class systems collapse. From which I wrote peaceful change. For Project Snowstorm, the peaceful change part is probably going to be what's going to happen to this current system that I've set up. I also wrote down quite a lot from the violent changes because there's some bits of it that could be useful. It's almost a combination of both, I think, for Project Snowstorm, where I see the Empire is sort of already unstable because of many reasons, which is sort of part of the peaceful change examples. So in there's a lot to do with how guilds and unions can become quite important and they tend to shake up a little bit the ladder, the system. And my book has guilds, merchant guilds, and I think that's going to essentially inform a new part of this section, which is going to be guilds. So it's not going to be part of Rift and Magic. I think it should be part of history and politics. Let's create a new one and it's just going to be guilds. I kind of like this little sticker thing. Okay, I think I'll use that. What would be a good image for the guilds? Maybe this. Is this in a market? I can't tell what this is yet. Okay, so maybe that's the one for now and I'll figure this out later. Reposition, I'll just drag it up. There we go. Empires can collapse through peaceful change portions of the economy. I'll change that to this in blue, and I'll make this blue background. Some of those have a higher status than others. Okay. So that's what I've got for guilds. Essentially, I've started this new page about guilds, and I'm going to leave it at that because that's all I have at the moment, but I'm going to continue thinking about this, and every single time something else pops up in my mind, or I need to add something for the story specifically. If I'm starting to write and I'm taking the story in a certain direction and I'm finding out something about the guilds that I need for it to exist, then I'm going to complete this page. And I have this page already existing, so I know I can refer to some information I've made in there, and I can go back to add more information in there. But essentially, I was reading the book, and the book was talking about guilds at some point, and I remembered, yes, I do have guilds in my world. That needs to be a page, that needs to exist in there somewhere. So that's kind of how I fill up my world building Bible, is through reading and taking elements of this. Another example, I don't have the physical book with me right now. I have been reading the book on the Habsburgs, The Rise and Fall of a World Power by Martin Rady. And you can see I've started making some notes by creating little highlights in the pages that I'm reading. So I've done a bunch of these in the introduction chapter, and I'll give an example. So essentially the introduction starts talking about this library that the Habsburgs had, and I highlighted this passage. Clearly, he imagined that a library should have something to do with books and scholarship, but this was a court library, and its purpose was different, to make a statement about the Habsburgs and their place in the divine ordering of the universe. The entire decoration of the library, including its ceiling, wall frescoes and furniture, speaks to the greatness of the Habsburgs and to their limitless power. So the four large globes of the earth and heavens that stand beneath the central cupola are metaphors for the reach of Habsburg ambition. And essentially, that gave me an idea of, I think my empire needs a court library, and I'd really love that, because there's more examples in this introductory chapter about, I think, whichever Charles, one of the Charles, you know, in the Habsburgs emperor's line. One of them had essentially changed his portrait, or made his portrait look like he could be the emperor that was prophetized to be the emperor of all and have world domination, essentially. There was a sentence in the book that I really loved: a symbol of their dedication to the Catholic Church and of their continued service as divine instruments on earth. And I think the empire and the emperors from those different families that I've set up in Project Snowstorm are very much going to rely on this idea that they are divine instruments on Earth. So that's another one. And essentially I already have a section here called religion, but say if I didn't have it, I would create it now and think, okay, I need to think about this religion, because if they're thinking that they are divine representation on Earth, they're divine instrument on Earth, then that means there is a divine. What is that divine? I've already had some ideas about a specific warrior goddess, and so in my mind I already know it's going to be a multiple god system. So say this page on religion is where I would start making notes about that. This is exactly the same way that I worked on the world building for my sci-fi Space Princess project, and I used a different book. I used Putting the Science in Fiction. And within this book, I went through the table of contents, and in the table of contents, I could see, so for instance, a chapter that I knew I was gonna have a big interest in was how to design a practical spaceship, because I knew I wanted spaceship in my sci-fi. So I went to page 244. And here we go. The first thing was about ship shape and the fact that a practical spaceship, starship, would be either spherical or cylindrical. There's some things about windows and how space is huge with not much to see, and essentially windows are impractical because they're a danger to have. Debris could easily break them, so they're not very useful or practical. So in my world building section, I have a section on spaceships, and in that section the first thing is what spaceships look like, and I already had put in there that it should be more rounded designs like submarines or airplanes with soft curves, that there should be no windows, the bridge where the captain pilots is located at the heart of the ship away from any weak points. So all of those elements come from reading these books, and I would then be like, okay, I want more information on one of these topics and there isn't enough in this book. I'm gonna then go online, find a video that explains a little bit more, or an article or whatever else you find, another book perhaps, and I'm gonna delve deeper into that topic. So for instance, when I started this, all I had was the spaceship look and feel, and then I also knew that I was going to need different types of spaceship. This was mostly for the use of my story specifically. So I knew I was going to have merchant space vessels, purpose spaceships, pleasure spacecrafts, and war spaceships. So in the merchant ones, I started thinking about transports cargo and merchant space vessels that carry passengers for hire, like cruise ships, ferries, intergalactic space liners. So for some of these, I wanted to have naming conventions that would match what people might relate to on Earth, what we actually have now here. So I researched a little bit of naming conventions for ships, and that's what I used as a reference. And those are things that sprout from just having a small chapter on spaceships. So it started taking a bigger shape. And then I had, here we go, this is the naming convention system. I then was like, okay, I have two factions, which is the Envoy and Andromeda, and then from these I knew that an Envoy spaceship was going to be ESS, but an Envoy research ship was going to be ERS, etc. So that was one example of the things that I started filling in my world building for Space Princess project. So now that you may have a more filled in world building system, and you can still fill it as you go. So as I go, I'm gonna fill in more of those pages. I might end up putting 2 pages together if I feel like I don't actually need to have them be separated. For instance, the monarchy system and the noble families really do belong together, and the noble families might end up going inside of the monarchy system. Another thing I did for Space Princess was when I was watching shows like The Expanse, for instance, every single time there was vocabulary that people used in their dialogues that made me feel like it belonged in a sci-fi. I wrote that down. I wrote that shit down. I have one last section in my world building system called vocabulary and details. And if you go on it, there are things like mag boots, because that was something that came from a show I was watching. They're using mag boots in order to travel, like to stick to the ship while they're repairing it out in space or something. And I thought, this is brilliant. I might need this for my book. So I put that in as a note. There was something about an unregistered flight path. There was something about wiping the logs. And then there was someone who said override initiated, and someone else at some point said you are cleared for station dock at berth C4. All of these little elements made me feel like I was creating a more believable vocabulary system for my characters, and that's like a good small world building element, but it's gonna make it feel more real. Okay, I feel like now we've talked enough about the world building part, and you might already have something that looks quite full like this, or like Project Snowstorm's version. So now that I have everything in place for this, let's say we've built it all, I think my second step would be to start building character sheets. So in my story bible of Project Snowstorm, I would then create a page called characters. But what you might start with is some bullet point notes about your character and not much else. As an example, if I go to Knights of Death, and I'll be honest, this is very empty because I started writing a lot in First Draft Pro. I'm not gonna go in depth about First Draft Pro because I want to make a video about writing programs in general, and I'll talk about it in there. But I did use their wiki sort of note system quite a lot. That's what I've been using, which is why my actual character sheet and world building of Knights of Death is very sparse, it's very empty, because I ended up doing it all in First Draft Pro. But if I go to Viv and Aeon, you can see I had started setting it up. So essentially, I created this little banner using, I think it was in Photoshop, but you can definitely, or maybe it was Figma, but you can do it in Canva if you want to make this pretty. And again, it's the same system as I showed you in the first part. To put a banner in is just uploading an image there as a cover and then just repositioning it. That's it. Dead easy. I added this as the icon, and then I put one little image and sort of like a quote from the book that sort of represents her, and then I created a little character card. This is all very aesthetic, and again, I'm very much about functionality instead of aesthetics. But let's say you want to make an aesthetic character sheet. Let's make this together. I need for this to open as a full page, open in full page. There we go. So I also used the serif typeface. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do serif, which looks nice. And we're then gonna add an icon, and I'm just gonna find blue snowflake. There we go. I want to hide this top bit because I don't want this on this page. Page comments. Off. Delete. There we go. Delete and delete. And I want to add a small image. So slash image. And I'm gonna go into the mood boards I have for Valois, and I'm gonna select one of them. I'm gonna use this image. I think aesthetically it'll be quite nice, and I'm gonna make it quite small, like this small, and I'm gonna align it left. So I click on the three little dots over here, and alignment left, there we go. And I'm gonna take this empty thing here, and I'll do this in terms of the space, so that this takes more space. This is where I'm gonna do slash quote, perfect. And do I have anything? Because I've written a little bit from his point of view. I'm gonna select this and change the quote size to large. There we go. I wanna make it italics, and I wanna change the color to blue. Actually, this whole quote color to blue text, so that it matches this, which I think looks nicer. We then have our character card and bio info. So I want to put the music, I think, right after this. Just create two dividers to sort of corner that music. Then I will do heading 2, and that's going to be character sheet. And I will put the color as blue, create a bit of space, italics, that looks nicer. And then here I want to add an emoji. I'm gonna go in the emojis, snow, and add a little snowflake. There we go. We're gonna do 2 columns, and I'm gonna make this as a table. Table, there we go. And I'm gonna make the second part of the table bigger, there we go. And then we're gonna put in there name, age, etc. So, name, age, gender, let's start with that. And I think actually under name, we're gonna put nickname, and that's where we'll put that information. Oops, nickname. And then this will go in here, nicknamed the Beast, or the Northern Beast, so I can delete that part. And then I'm gonna make this part a header column. So if I click this, you can see it takes a different color, and you can change that color. So I'll go in color here and make this blue, and I will also then go here and change the text. Oh, you can only do one at a time. Okay, so now that we've started the character sheet, we can start filling things in. It's a very simple table. If I were to select these 3 dots instead, I could do a header row, which you can do both, so you can combine these, and it just changes the color. I have what he fights with, so I feel like I should put that, so I'm just gonna put weapon. And I also feel like I should put like status. Maybe that should go higher, like after age. I don't know his age, but I'd say he's mid-30s, so I'll just put mid-30s for now, and I'll figure out his age later. And the fact that he fights with a broadsword gets in here. So I'm starting to see a semblance of a character sheet just from this. I feel like it looks better in a smaller format, so I'm just going to take this down to header 3. And then for this Viv sheet, I had biographic info. So I might just do that and copy it. So I'll just drag this and option drag it here to this column. Ooh, put it higher. Yes. And put bio info. So I'll just copy it. Again, I have to make it. And oh, I did not want the emoji to be in italics. There we go. Italics. I don't think this is in the right column. There we go. There we go. I'll just change this to small text. And suddenly things are fitting a little bit better. So I can make this and then this. In the bio info, I'll put any bullet points I have from my initial thoughts about the character. Then I do want to have a pretty cover here at the top. So I think I'll do one very quickly. We can go in Canva. I think that's probably the best. And I'll just look up the size. So Notion cover sizes. Oh, there's a guide here. So for it to display well across all devices, use a canvas of 1500 pixels by 600 pixels. So that's what we'll do. We'll just do create a design. Where can I just custom size? 1500 by 600. There we go. Create new design. I think I will use this. Cool. Then let's change that image. I'm just going to add some text, and I think I also want a scripty font. So I'm just going to do script. Here are some nice scripty fonts. All the ones with the little crown are pro, which I don't pay for, so I will not use. I quite like this. There's something more grand and elegant about this. And it doesn't need to be super readable anyway, because actually we do have his name as the title of the page as well. There we go. Let's add this. And I'm just going to reposition it and see whether that's fine. When I go back to characters and I click on him, the thing that appears is this, and it's actually perfect in that format. So if I leave it open like this, I'm happy. So his status, more so than status, is going to be title. Oh, it's going to be title. There we go. And we're gonna move this right under age, and we're gonna say Archduke. There we go. His status is part of the 7 noble families. In his bio info, I might put things about his power, which earned him his nickname. So that's just some small bits of information I might have about the character that I'll just add in there. So I'll do divider, and then under the divider I'll add another title here, and that will be backstory, and that's where we'll go into details. So for instance, I know that his family is one of the original 7 families who could be part of the rota for the title of emperor. And this might end up going into a family background thing. So I might create 2 of these and say this is actually going to become a family. And italics, and then this one will actually be more about him personally. And at the bottom I've got a key relationships table, which I might do as well, and then a character arc which has nothing in it but exists. I'll do another divider, I'll copy that, and then I'll copy the backstory header, and I'll change it for key relationships. I'll do a table as well, and I think I might put that, let me put this right under, there we go. I might put that next to the family thing actually. And so the family thing, here let's put it under the proper column, and then the key relationships will go here. And I think that makes a little bit more sense. I'll do the same thing as I did above. I'll change this into a header column, and I'll change the color to blue text. And then in this Renee section, I can select her name. And here where you have add a link, you can then search for other pages that exist. So I will look for her page, and I have one that exists. So I can just click on this, and now that will create a link to her. So I can link everything together. So for instance, in the family section, I've talked about the 7 families and the title of emperor. So I think I'm going to select emperor and create a link here to monarchy systems, which is part of the world building. And now I can click on that, and it takes me to that page where I talk about the monarchy system. And I can do the other way around as well. So for instance, who gets to elect the emperor, talking about the 7 families, and I have my note about Valois. So I can select his name, create a link, and select his page, and there we go. And then everything becomes interlinked and becomes more of a wiki that you can use throughout. Every single time you're like, right, I have this character, who's his best friend again? Let's say I have his best friend's name here, then I can click on that and go straight to the page, and I don't have to look for it for ages. So yeah, that's pretty much how you create a character sheet, if that's the system that you want to follow. The last thing that we're gonna explore now is timelines. Some of my projects absolutely need a timeline for me to keep track of when everything happens. So let's leave this character sheet system and let's go back to Project Snowstorm. We're gonna start a new page. We're still in the right column of prepping, and I'm just gonna do new page. There we go. And we're gonna do project timeline. And we're simply gonna do slash timeline view, and it's gonna create a new database. And it automatically shows up as a new view. So essentially you have a calendar that starts. I think the best way to view it is probably in full width, because then you can see more dates. We'll just put a title of PS timeline. There we go. And then I'm gonna hide the database title. There we go. So clearly we're talking high fantasy here, and I don't think that I actually need a 2024 timeline, because that's not going to be very helpful. I haven't decided actually on the time units, and I don't think they're going to be a big important part of my world building, so I might just stick to something similar to what we have here and keep it to months and years. So in this case that could be useful. What I could decide to do is, say I wanted to establish how things happen throughout several years, then I can change the view here. So it says month, and you can change it to hours, you can change it to day, you can change it to week, and you can change it to year. And if you see the full year, it's a little bit easier if you have a long-term timeline to deal with. The other thing I can do as well is, you can see these little cards. These are the elements you're going to add to the timeline, and you can show the table that actually showcases each of these little cards and where that takes place. You can always click on today and it'll bring you back, or say you're very far and you want to see one specific element, like card 1, I can click here and it will take me to that card. Let's start by deleting the cards I don't need. And what I can do is say in February of that year, so I'll move it to February, like here, February, and then I want it to be a shorter amount of time, so I could say like, let's open it so I can see. So if you click on open here, you get a side peek, like they call it, and it just opens the card here. So let's change the date here because it'll be a little bit easier. And let's change that to say it is the 3rd to the 3rd. So it's just one day. And you can change it here as well if you want to change the date there. You can also say you don't have an end date. This is all meant to be like quite useful for business, and like if you were to work and use this for a working calendar, this is very useful. But I've used it, for instance, for Lockhart and Beckett, An Office Full of Monsters, because it takes place in our modern day and time, and I was trying to make sure that the amount of time that my main character Rose spends in her training sessions at her new job makes sense. And then afterwards it all needs to happen around Christmas time at some point, because she goes back to her family to see them around Christmas. So that was also an important factor to take in, and that's when having a calendar view is super useful. So let's say that it's on February 3rd, which is when Anne and Valois wedding happen. Their wedding happens. So let's say that. I'll expand this view a little bit so we can see it better. And then that can help me plan out the rest. So let's say they're meant to get married around that time. But potentially one of the reasons he noticed her, which she doesn't know yet, is that there was a ball at some point when she talked to him to help his sister. So I'm gonna then add a new card, and I'm just gonna put Valois meets Anne at ball, and we're then gonna place it, let's say, in December. And I'm just gonna do December 1st here, and then I'm gonna reduce this so that it's just on December 1st, because it's only a 1-day thing. So then I start knowing, okay, 2 months later is when they get married. That's a little bit too soon after they've first met and she doesn't even remember it. It would make more sense if the ball had happened a lot earlier, if I want to keep the wedding a winter wedding. So I might move it and place it, say, in August, for instance. And then based on that, maybe there's the request for an arranged marriage happens 2 months later. So what I quite like to do is filter it, sort it, so that it goes by date, so that the first thing that you then see is the first thing that happens. And then, as I was showing you earlier, you also have this sneak peek for each card. So I could say, for instance, I'm going to change this title, and then in there I can put some details and say Valois requests the arranged marriage. Father sends his official letter approving the marriage, for instance. And then I would have all of these details. I could put anything else in this page, an image, whatever. And then you could put your status in progress or done. I could use this to say if I'm writing this scene and then I'm like, this is technically something that should happen before the book starts, but say that I was using this as like scenes that I'm writing in order, then I could say change the status to in progress and then to done once that's finished. So because I have information within this page now, and if I open it there is actual content, this little icon appeared. I could choose to put an icon per each of them if I wanted to. I think I'm just going to leave it as, so that I can see which pages have information in, and they'll just show up with this icon, and which ones don't, they'll show up without an icon. So that's essentially how I can use the timeline. The other thing that you'll see is this date thing at the top. That's just because we're in ascending view of the dates, as I showed you earlier. I just wanted to see them in order. So you can sort this in different ways. You can delete this sorting, you can add a sort and say by alphabetical order, for instance, or by status if you were checking which scenes you've written, which ones you haven't. And then say you want to use all of these pages as like a scene system because you're working from your timeline to check what you've written, what you haven't written. You can add a view, and here at the top you see timeline view. If you click on the little plus, it will create a new view of the elements you already have in there. So for instance, I could very much just say I want a table format of this, and it automatically puts in a table format everything I've already put in my timeline. So you can see, let's just hide this database title. You can see that I have the arranged marriage request at the top here. And then this is an assignment if you are using this to work, and you can then assign this task to someone. So you can delete this and say delete property, and I don't want this column. The date is in there automatically because of the timeline view, but you can again hide in this view system. So you don't have this in there anymore, but you haven't deleted that property, so it still exists and you still have a date that sorts this through the timeline. You can then keep the status, for instance, and change this to say, this is in progress. And then, for instance, you want to see what's in progress, what's not. You can use that as a way to sort your view as well. So you go in here, sort status, and it will do, for instance, ascending or say descending. So everything that's done or in progress will be at the top. Let's change this one to done. It will automatically go to the top. And then you'll see at the bottom the not started. You can do the other way around. You can add more properties to this. So say, for instance, you click on the plus here, it shows up new properties you can use. You can put a due date, for instance, and say this needs to be written by the 25th of September. You can add a number, for instance, and that number could be the word count. Let's just put a number in, and then the number format, you can just change it. Let's say you're using a table for like counting money, you can change it to any of those currencies. Now that you have a number, say for instance I've written 350 words for this and 500 words for this scene. Here at the bottom of your table you have calculation systems. And what you want to do, if you want to see how many words you've been writing overall in all of these scenes, is go to your calculate and at the bottom of this column, and then go to, so if you do count, it will just count, okay, I have 2 cells that have information, so the values is 2. That's not what you want. If you go to more options, you can do sum, and suddenly it tells you, you have written 850 words for this. So you can change the name of the property from number to word count, for instance, and then suddenly that helps you create your scene system and how you can write them and how to calculate your word count for each of them, which is quite useful. So that's one other way to view it. You can create as many different views as you want. Say, for instance, you really are loving using the system to create scenes and how you're working on them. You can change this table view and make a new view called board. When you have a board view, it puts in there automatically what has not been started, what's in progress, and what's done. So it uses, let's hide this database title again, it uses your previously made status system to sort everything into a board, and you can move things. So let's say I'm in progress for the wedding, I'll move it to in progress. Now if I go back to my table, you can see that it's automatically put that in progress. Then you can create a simple list view, which just lists all the items that you've got. Let's create a calendar view. So the one we've got is a timeline. The calendar view is just like this. It just tells you where each of these things are. So for instance, I know that, when have I put this? In February. In February there's something. So if I go to February, you can see here the wedding is located there. We have a chart view, which just shows you the progress of things based on the status that you've put on them. Finally, you can create a gallery view, and that is just going to put each of these cards into their own gallery system. This is the same as what we've been using. Say for instance, characters, these are cards. The most useful ones for me personally would be this timeline view, the table format, and maybe the board. But I tend to just use this as a timeline and nothing else, not to actually check which scenes I've written or anything. But yeah, this is now starting to take shape. So you now have quite a few elements in your list of prepping items for your project. You've got a world building gallery, you've got a characters gallery, and you potentially have a timeline of the events that happen in your novel that you can also use as a way to create a word count system for each scene you're writing and all that. I feel like that has covered every way that I personally like to use Notion to help me write books, and I hope that that was helpful for you too, and that even if you're not using it in the same way, you found some things that you might want to integrate in your routine or in your process. If that's the case and you enjoyed this video, do leave a like down below, leave a comment if there's anything you want to discuss or ask questions about how you use Notion or discuss the ways that you use Notion. I always love to chat to people down in the comments, so please feel free to leave one. And consider subscribing to this channel if you want to see more content like this. Ring that bell, all that jazz, and I will see you guys in the next one.